If you were to build Vince McMahon's perfect wrestler from the ground up, it would probably look like Randy Orton. On a physical level, he has the look of a champion, and on a technical level, the skill to back it up. As a third-generation performer, Orton may very well be the best all-around talent the business has ever seen, a true natural in every sense of the word. However, for all the highs Orton has seen in his two-decade-long career, he almost lost it all on a number of occasions. So, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey so far in Legend Killer, the Randy Orton story. Randall Keith Orton was born on April 1, 1980 in Knoxville, Tennessee to mother Elaine and father Bob. Bob, of course, was better known as local wrestling legend Cowboy Bob Orton Jr., and he wasn't the only industry superstar in the family. Randy's grandfather being Bob Orton Sr. and his uncle Barry Orton. This all meant that wrestling was in his blood from day one, and so it should come as no surprise that he quickly fell in love with the sport and decided at an early age it was what he wanted to do. Initially, this came against the wishes of his parents, however, who, both knowing how difficult the lifestyle could be, wanted to usher their son into something else. At first, Randy decided to follow their wishes and he enlisted himself in the Marines, though he quickly realized that this life wasn't for him, and after going AWOL, he was dishonorably discharged when he was still just 19 years old. Fortunately, he had other skills to fall back on then. He had excelled as an amateur wrestler in high school and was eventually able to convince his family to help him segue this into the world of the pros in 2000, where he began training at the Mid-Missouri Wrestling Association Southern Illinois Conference Wrestling in St. Louis. There, he was shown the ropes by his father, and given how quickly he took to things, it was obvious that WWE would soon come calling. And come calling they did. Yes, in 2001, right at the tail end of the Attitude Era, Orton was signed to a developmental deal with Vince McMahon, initially being sent down to Ohio Valley Wrestling for seasoning where, in what has gone down as one of the most iconic classes of rookies in the company's history, he continued his training alongside the likes of John Cena, Brock Lesnar, and Dave Bautista. And even with this incredible wealth of talent on display, Randy managed to stand out during his time with OVW, winning their hardcore title on 2 separate occasions. It didn't take long then for WWE to start easing him up to the main roster, initially booking him on dark matches and on the house show circuit before he arrived fully on the April 25, 2002 episode of SmackDown, where he defeated Hardcore Holly. Following this victory, Orton became a fan favorite, someone portrayed as a blue chipper with a huge future in front of him. By September of that year, he had been drafted over to the Raw brand, where he looked like he was set to start moving even further up the roster. This was until things were briefly stalled when he suffered a shoulder injury, taking him out of action for the next few months. Luckily, however, the youngster was able to use this to his advantage, as he began putting out a series of Randy News Network vignettes where he would give updates on his condition and develop his character from vanilla babyface into a narcissistic villain. And as a result of the success of these segments, upon his return, he was booked to be a part of Evolution, a stable created by Triple H in something of a nod to the Four Horsemen of WCW and NWA fame. This group would also feature former Horseman Ric Flair himself in the legend role, while the up-and-comers positions would be filled by Batista and Orton. Of course, given the legendary career that all 4 men have gone on to have, it's no surprise then that Evolution is now considered to be one of the greatest stables in wrestling history. And with all that talent on display, it would have been easy for Orton to fall through the cracks. However, he not only managed to avoid this, but actually thrive under the pressure. During 2003 and 2004, he established himself as the one to watch of the group, and it was here that he developed the gimmick of the Legend Killer, a cocky upstart who would routinely disrespect and beat up older, more established talents. This proved true when he defeated Shawn Michaels at 2003's Unforgiven pay-per-view, and even truer when, the following year, he began a feud with Mick Foley, one which would end in a now iconic hardcore match at that year's Backlash, and would see Orton earn the respect of both fans and his peers as he took a brutal beating but still ended up getting the win. Of course, this wasn't the only success Randy was finding during those early days. A few months prior to his feud with Foley, he had beaten Rob Van Dam to win the Intercontinental title, his first singles title victory, and from there, he would go on to have the longest Intercontinental title reign in 7 years, as he held onto the belt for 210 days. It was clear based on all of this that he was having the rocket strapped to him, and by the summer of 2004, the company felt he was ready for another honor, that of the youngest world champion in WWE's history. Yes, at August 15th SummerSlam pay-per-view, Randy was able to pin Chris Benoit to become the World Heavyweight Champion at just 24 years of age, a feat that had never been matched before. And it was this victory that saw his mentor Triple H's vengeful side come out as, seeing he was no longer the main focus of the stable, he booted Orton out of Evolution the next night on Raw, turning the young star babyface in the process. The following month, Triple H would even defeat the Legend Killer to take the belt from him, something which was initially supposed to set up a big WrestleMania program between the two. This planned program would end up getting scrapped, however, when Batista caught fire and WWE switched gears, leaving Orton, unfortunately, looking like something of a cast-off in the process. But for as botched as the initial title run had been, it didn't take the Tennessee native long to bounce back, and by early 2005, he had his sights set on the biggest legend of all, The Undertaker, as he began calling the dead man out and vowing to end his undefeated streak at WrestleMania. Now, for all the talk of the legend of The Undertaker's streak over the years, the first decade or so was mostly a coincidence, and it wasn't until his match with Ric Flair at WrestleMania 18 where there was an on-screen reference to him having gone undefeated. Even after that, the idea of a streak match never fully became a thing until WrestleMania 21, when Randy took on Taker, and it was here that the Legend Killer reached the next level. Yes, that night he had an absolute classic, one that would set the template for streak matches in the years to come. There was even an argument at the time that Orton should have won that night, but of course, he didn't. He would, however, get a second chance come that year's SummerSlam, when following some help from his father, he had his rematch with the Phenom, this time even getting the elusive victory. Following this, the heated feud between the three men continued into a handicap casket match on October 9, 2005's No Mercy pay-per-view, and then concluded once and for all in a Hell in a Cell match at that December's Armageddon, a match most memorable now for the controversy of Bob Orton Sr. being told to bleed during it despite being positive for hepatitis at the time. Still, with that feud now under his belt, it felt like Randy was a made man, and would surely be one of, if not the top star in the company in the years that followed. The only thing that could get in the way of this, in fact, was himself. Yes, at this time, the young Orton was notorious for having a number of attitude problems backstage. Part of it could be put down to his age being such a young man who had just been given the world on a platter. He likely hadn't had a chance to mature as a person yet. Part of it could also be put down to just how superhumanly talented he was, with this seeming to give him a feeling of superiority over others on the roster. Now, it should be said that in the years since, Randy has evidently grown up a lot and today looks back on his actions then for what they were, immature and stupid. Still, it took him a while to get there, and at the time, this is probably what stopped him from being the top star in the company. And these problems persisted when on April 4th, 2006, after having feuded with Rey Mysterio and Kurt Angle over the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania 22, he was suspended for 60 days as a result of unprofessional conduct. Upon his return in June, he was moved over to Raw, where he entered into a singles program with Kurt Angle. From there, using this time to try and let the heat die down and re-earn the trust of management. And evidently it didn't take long for him to do this, as in the lead up to SummerSlam of that year, he had started feuding with Hulk Hogan, something which culminated in the Legend vs. Legend Killer match at the pay-per-view and saw Orton add a further notch to his belt by having a great showing with the Hulkster. Following this, he formed an alliance with Edge, the two both having scores to settle with the recently reformed D-Generation X at the time. Going by the name of Rated RKO, Edge and Orton were able to defeat their common enemy at November 5th, 2006's Cyber Sunday, and after that would dominate the tag team division as they became Raw Tag Team Champions on November 13th, holding on to those belts for a while after until friction started to develop between the two and an inevitable feud began as both men had their sights set on winning the WWE title. It was here that Randy further developed his character, now referring to himself as the Viper, as he would stalk his victims like a snake. It was also here that he began adding a devastating new move to his arsenal in the form of the punt, a running kick to the head of his opponent which, while spectacular looking, was eventually banned for being too dangerous to pull off. Still, this didn't bother him much as he already had arguably the best finisher in the business at that point with the RKO, a cutter which would often be hit out of nowhere and would always get a huge pop regardless of whether he was portraying a heel or a babyface. and this move would help him win his way back into the world title picture by July of 2007, when he began feuding with the man who would go on to become maybe his most famous rival, John Cena. Yes, if Orton was the 1B of the Ruthless Aggression and PG eras, then Cena was without a doubt the 1A. The feud between them then was one which, at least initially, saw fans get hugely invested and let Randy fully embrace his villainous side by at one point punting Cena's father. And while the Viper was never able to wrestle the belt away from Big Match John at this time, when Cena had to vacate the gold a few months later due to injury, Randy was deemed the next in line and was awarded the belt by Vince McMahon himself. From there, he reignited his program with Shawn Michaels, defending the title against the Heartbreak Kid on multiple occasions before moving on to Chris Jericho and doing the same. The dominating run continued from there as he went through challengers such as Jeff Hardy and a returning John Cena, before he finally fell to Triple H at April 27, 2008's Backlash. Soon after this, and Randy would have to take some time out after breaking his collarbone, and then later, during his recovery, getting involved in a motorcycle accident. When he returned to WWE on the September 1st episode of Raw, he began courting World Tag Team Champions Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase Jr., claiming that with him as their mentor, he could take them to the next level. This would begin a union between the three men known as Legacy, and would see much success for Orton, as by January of 2009, he had started tormenting the McMahon family, particularly Stephanie. This leading to Triple H, for the first time in years, acknowledging his marriage to the billion-dollar princess on screen and setting about defending his wife's honor. The story that followed, which many have since dubbed the Age of Orton, was perhaps Randy's high watermark in the company, as he felt like a truly despicable villain and main event force throughout the whole thing. He would even go as far as to deliver a punt to Vince McMahon in the lead-up to that year's Royal Rumble, and when the night of the pay-per-view itself came, he would go on to win the titular match, booking himself a shot at Triple H's WWE title at WrestleMania 25 in the process. Unfortunately, when WrestleMania came that year, this highly anticipated blow-off would be overshadowed by The Undertaker's Shawn Michaels classic that preceded it, leaving the whole thing feeling limp by comparison. Still, Randy wasn't going to let this stop him riding this career high, and at the next month's Backlash pay-per-view, he was able to win the gold during a six-man tag between Legacy and the unit of Triple H, Batista, and Shane McMahon. From here, he would move on to a feud with the Animal before finishing off his beef with the Game once and for all in a 3 Stages of Hell match at June 28, 2009's The Bash. Unfortunately, this superb run at the top couldn't last forever though, and it would be his old foe John Cena who would eventually dethrone him as champion in autumn of that year. Following this, Randy attempted to regroup and soon started a feud with Kofi Kingston, which led to an awesome brawl on the November 16th episode of Raw, which however also allegedly saw the Viper abusing his backstage power and quelling Kofi's push after getting frustrated with him missing a cue during a match. Yes, it seemed like backstage attitude issues were still a problem for Orton at this time. Nevertheless, for any heat he may have had, he still continued to turn it on in the ring when necessary, and this kept him near the top of the card throughout the next 3 years as he entered into a number of world title feuds against the likes of Sheamus and Christian. He even ended up winning both the WWE and world titles again at different points during this period, and looked to be riding high until May 30th of 2012 when he was suspended for a second wellness policy violation. This being particularly significant as, at the time, a third failure would have seen him be released from his contract as per the company's policies. Now being more cautious about how they used him, WWE moved him into more of an upper mid-card position upon his return on the July 30th episode of Raw, with the Viper feuding with the likes of Dolph Ziggler and Alberto Del Rio for a while. By the end of that year, he had started a program with The Shield too, and used his star power to help get them over as legitimate threats. This, it seemed, was enough for him to fully re-earn the trust of management again, as at the July 14, 2013 Money in the Bank pay-per-view, he would win the titular match, and only a month later, would cash in on Daniel Bryan to regain the WWE title and become a founding member of The Authority. Of course, this period is now mostly remembered for the slow rise of Daniel Bryan, and so it's almost gone forgotten how effective a sleazy heel champion Randy portrayed here, regularly making fans desperate to see him lose the gold. Before that eventual loss would come though, Orton would make further history when he became the first undisputed champion the company had seen in years, as he beat World Heavyweight Champ John Cena at December 15th's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view, unifying the two belts in the process. Of course, as we all know, this title run would be ended by Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30, something we've discussed in more detail over on our video on him. Not that this did much to hurt Randy though. In fact, by this point in his career, he'd gone from legend killer to full-blown legend, so could pretty much recover from anything. And recover he did when, along with Triple H and Batista, he reformed Evolution in the spring of 2014, as the trio began feuding with The Shield. Following this, and the eventual breakup of The Shield, Randy set his sights on Roman Reigns, the man being groomed as the next face of the company. The program between these two men carrying on throughout the summer, and seeing the Viper do everything he could to try and get the big dog ready for his upcoming world title push. After that, dissension started sowing itself within the Authority as the Apex Predator began growing more and more distrustful of Seth Rollins, this eventually leading to Triple H picking a side and kicking Randy out of the Authority. Following this, Orton turned babyface again and wasted no time in trying to take out Rollins once and for all, this climaxing in a match at WrestleMania 31 where he would end up winning after delivering probably the greatest RKO of all time. From there, following a brief but bloody feud with Brock Lesnar, Randy began being scoped out by the Wyatt family, beginning a feud between himself and the stable's leader Bray Wyatt that has continued on to this very day. The original incarnation of the beef saw him pretend to join the stable in the summer of 2005 after enduring weeks of beatdowns. Of course, this all turned out to be a ruse though, and after winning his second Royal Rumble match at the titular 2016 pay-per-view, he turned on the clan and announced his intentions to beat Bray for the WWE title he was holding at the time at WrestleMania 33. And while some enjoyed this feud, others found it to be overly campy, a sentiment that was certainly magnified when they had their infamous House of Horrors rematch at April 30th's Payback, just 1 month after Orton had beaten Wyatt for the belt at the grandest stage of them all. Following this, he moved on from Bray for the time being, and eventually lost the title to Jinder Mahal at May's Backlash pay-per-view, from there briefly phasing down the card again as he started competing for the United States title, a belt he would eventually win from Bobby Roode at March 11, 2018's Fastlane, thus making him the 18th Grand Slam champion in the company's history. And this was a position that Randy seemed happy to occupy on the card by then, as, with him getting older and having little else to prove, he began moving to a more part-time schedule so as to spend more time with his family. Of course, he was never gone from TV for long and would have some memorable programs with the likes of Jeff Hardy, Rey Mysterio, and AJ Styles in the years that followed. But for now, it felt like he had finally matured as a person and was content to help others get over rather than focus on himself. He even got a chance to atone for the infamous situation with Kofi Kingston years prior, when he feuded with the New Day member after Kingston became WWE Champion at WrestleMania 35, with Randy this time putting him over strong. More recently, he's had 3 very high-profile feuds, the first being with his old tag team partner Edge, who shocked the world when he came out of retirement at the 2020 Royal Rumble. This feud, with the exception of one dodgy match at WrestleMania 36, proved not only that Edge still had it, but that Randy could still be relied on to turn it on in a big main event level program, as the battles between these two became one of the best things about WWE during the pandemic era. The second of these feuds came soon after that, as Orton spent months during the middle of the year battling over the WWE title with Drew McIntyre, at one point even briefly winning the belt again, but never taking his eye off the goal of getting a new star over as a main event player. But of course, perhaps the most memorable and most controversial of his 3 big programs in 2020 was one that, as of the time of this video's recording, is still ongoing, and has seen the Viper revive his beef with Bray Wyatt, who is now going by his new alter ego of The Fiend. This has been somewhat divisive, with some calling it brilliant in its level of callbacks to the past and continued use of creativity, while others have argued that it's all a bit too hokey and cartoonish to be taken seriously. Whatever side of the argument you fall on with this, it's undoubtedly been must-see, and has given us moments such as Alexa Bliss's transformation into a Harley Quinn-like herald for The Fiend, as well as The Fiend himself being burnt to a crisp at December 20th's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view. Since that event, in fact, The Fiend has been missing from TV. However, it is expected that he will return in time for WrestleMania 37 to settle his beef with Randy once and for all. And if history has taught us anything, it's that we should never underestimate the Viper's ability to put on an absolute classic when he has his head fully in the game. So we expect to see something epic when fans finally return at this year's Showcase of the Immortals. And from there, who knows what the future holds for the legend. He seems to have at least a few years left, so we don't expect to see him retire anytime in the near future. And during that time, we can only assume that he'll still have some more classic matches and moments left in him, because when Randy Orton is motivated, there aren't many people who could put on a better performance than him. And that's why he will forever be considered to be one of the greatest WWE superstars of all time. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.